News Channel 8 presents New Skills for Living with your host, Tom Lavin, a healthy plan for healthy living.
Hello and welcome to New Skills for Living, a show dedicated to healing and wholeness in our community. Have you wondered how someone who drinks and uses drugs and continues to drink and use drugs, and they're having problems in their life with their family, their career, their finances, their health, and they continue to drink and use drugs, have you wondered why do they keep doing that? And have you wondered, like, if someone does successfully stop drinking and using drugs, how do they do that? Have you wondered about marijuana, and can you really become dependent either physically or psychologically on marijuana? And is alcohol really a problem? And what about pain meds and benzodiazepines that we find in the medicine cabinet? Can there possibly be anything wrong with those medications? We're going to address those topics today in New Skills for Living as we continue our addiction recovery series. And we've got a great guest, Dr. Tim Coughlin. Dr. Coughlin is an addictionologist, and he's also a principal of Reno Family Physicians. And Dr. Coughlin is really known as kind of the grandfather of addictions treatment in Nevada. He's known as a very helpful person. He's a very wise and kind man. And we're very grateful that Dr. Coughlin is here today to share his wisdom with us. Tim, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks, Tom.
It's great.
I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. And I think that first question, Tim, about how can someone continue to drink and use drugs even though they're having all these problems in their life? What's going on with them, Tim?
Well, when I hear that question, the first thing I think of is that alcohol and drugs do something different to the alcoholic and the addict than they do to normal people. And one way to look at that is to realize that the average social drinker doesn't want to get high, doesn't want to get intoxicated. In fact, tries to avoid that. They may have a drink or two and they begin to say, gee, I'm beginning to feel this, and they stop. That's not what happens with the addict and the alcoholic. You know, they're just beginning to feel it and they want more.
They want more.
And then sometimes I think even people in the recovering community wonder about people who seem to be pushing this thing in a suicidal form, you know, who continue to have just absolutely horrific things happen to them. And even the big book of AA talks about a jaywalker. They use an example of someone who continues to jaywalk despite getting hit by cars and trolleys and everything else, and doesn't seem to ever learn from bad experiences. I think of it sometimes in a different way. It's sort of how deeply penetrated is the person by his addiction. You know, some people are just have the disease worse than other people. And, you know, sometimes in the 12-step programs we tell people, you don't take credit for getting sober sooner than somebody else. They may have demons you can't even imagine. And you have no idea what's going on in their head, but it is very, very frustrating for anybody trying to help people with drug and alcohol problems.
So, Tim, I hear you talking about a couple of things maybe. Like, one might be what's going on in the mind of the alcoholic or the addict is either denial or rationalization or minimization. The other thing I heard you talking about is maybe some people are self-medicating their demons. And that seems to be the only option to make those demons go away. Can you talk about the minimization, rationalization, denial, self-medication phenomenon, Tim?
That is the essence of the disease right there. I don't have the problem, and if I had the problem, it wouldn't be as bad as you say, and anybody married to you would drink. You know, that's how, you know, no self-respecting alcoholic ever assumed responsibility for his own behavior. You know? And that's one of the ways that they make people crazy. You know, the average alcoholic can make white look like black, up look like down. When he gets done with you, you won't wonder why he drinks. You'll wonder why he doesn't drink more, and you'll feel responsible for it. That's why Al-Anon is such a tremendous asset for people who are trying to deal with people with chemical dependency issues.
What does happen, though, Tim, in your experience as an addictionologist? You have seen hundreds and probably thousands of people get into recovery. What happens that somebody crosses that line into recovery, Tim?
Well, I think the old line, you hit bottom when you stop digging. And sometimes it's really scary what the bottom can be. You know, on a night like tonight when it's really cold, you think to yourself, what would I do if I had no home, no food, no shelter, and the only thing I had was my chemical?
Yes.
You know? And I think for normal people, that's just impossible to wrap your brain around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just
Mm-hmm.
can't imagine it. And yet we see it here in Reno every day.
Yes.
And it's really tragic in a lot of ways.
It is.
Yeah.
It is very painful, Tim. But there is that element of recovery, and we've only got a half a minute.
Okay.
What is it? So somebody hits bottom, and then the light comes on, Tim? They start taking responsibility. They start seeing they do have a problem. Only about 15 seconds, Tim.
I think they just decide, I don't want to live like this anymore.
I see.
You know?
Yeah.
The old saw, I'm sick and tired of being sick and
Yeah,
tired. You
yeah.
just have to become
Yeah.
totally fed up with yourselves.
That's a great way to leave this segment. And right after this brief break, we're going to continue talking with Dr. Coughlin about addiction and recovery. Hello, and welcome back to New Skills for Living. You'll see up on your screen the website easeap.com. You would want to access this website to see Dr. Coughlin's interview, as well as all the other interviews in our addiction recovery series. I'd also like to now show you the newsletters that you can access on the website. There are over 80 newsletters on depression, anxiety, dealing with stress, relationships, forgiveness, making amends, all types of topics that you can access and read online, or you can copy and print and read yourself or share with your friends. That's on the easeap.com website. And now we'd like to continue talking with Dr. Coughlin, who's an addictionologist and also a principal with Reno Family Physicians, about recovery. And Tim, can you tell us a little bit more about what is it that happens with someone when they take that first step into recovery and they get away from the addiction and they're now in recovery?
I think the first step is they have to admit there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
They have to admit that they're powerless over whatever their chemical may be, and that they need help. And that's a very big step for a lot of people, and one that a lot of people can't never do, are never able to actually
Yes.
take.
Yeah.
And then I think accepting help is also very difficult for some people sometimes. And but it's absolutely critical. And then you have to accept responsibility for your own behavior and try to clean up the wreckage of the past as much as you can. And I think sometimes reaching out to other people and trying to help people who may be in worse shape than you are is very effective. That's the essence of the 12-step program. You know, I can't, but we can.
Yes.
And it's, you know, it was founded in America by Americans in 1935, so I think it's still probably the cornerstone of things. But other modalities are out there that work too.
Mm-hmm.
Psychotherapy works. Getting heavily involved in your church can work.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of other kind of programs that are also available.
Mm-hmm. And Tim, maybe to talk about that a little bit more, in the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings or NA meetings or Dual Recovery Anonymous meetings, there are a lot of different meetings to help people that have a lot of different types of needs, aren't there, Tim? There's not just one.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the diversity within the 12 steps so people can find exactly the right meeting for them?
I think there's the two major ones are Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. And of course, Al-Anon is very, very helpful for people who have to live with alcoholics.
Yeah, for the family members.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah. And then there's young people's meetings, and then there's Dual Recovery Anonymous meetings, huh, Tim, with
Alateen, there's young people in Alcoholics Anonymous, which are very active and very kind of happening kind of place.
Yeah.
They have dances and campouts and all kinds of other things, because, you know, the average AA meeting is getting younger and younger all the time.
Yes, yes.
You know.
Yes, whereas back in the mid-70s, I think the average age at an AA meeting was like 50 years old. And there are a lot younger people coming in now.
In 1935, when AA started, if you showed up in a meeting and you still had a watch, the guys would look at you, that's too bad. He's
Too high bottom, huh?
Still got a watch. Hasn't hit bottom yet.
So yeah, so a lot of younger folks are coming in there. So they're crossing that line too, Tim, and they're admitting they have a problem. They're taking responsibility. They're reaching out for help.
And that's an interesting thing too, because some of the older guys in AA will look at these kids that come in and grumble and say, well, he doesn't even shave. Hell, I've spilled more than he ever drank.
Yeah, yeah.
And what they don't seem to realize, the kids are looking at them and thinking, you rotten old something or other. You couldn't be much of an alcoholic if you lasted 30 years. You can't drink like I do and last 30 years. And then, strangely enough, the kids will kind of gravitate towards those old bleeding deacons.
Yes.
And it's kind of like grandparents and grandchildren sometimes.
Yeah, and then there's that fellowship of recovery.
Fellowship is critical.
Having gone through hell and helping each other out.
Yeah.
So that nobody goes back to hell, huh?
That's right.
Yeah.
That is absolutely critical.
Yeah, that fellowship is really important. And then the 12 steps too that you alluded to, Tim. And then we need to be wrapping up this segment with Dr. Coughlin. And then right after this brief break, we're going to continue to take a look at addiction recovery. Actually, in the next segment, we're going to focus in on marijuana and some other drugs. So we'll see you in a minute. Hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking with Dr. Tim Coughlin, and in this segment we're going to talk about marijuana and other drugs as well. So Tim, marijuana is very pervasive in our society. I know you as a physician and as an addictionologist have been concerned about this. Can you tell us a little bit about the elements of psychological dependence and physical dependence and how it affects a person, Tim?
Yeah, well, the first thing you need to know is that the marijuana the kids are smoking now is 10 times more powerful, if not more, than the marijuana their parents were smoking in the summer of love and the Haight-Ashbury. And that is a really significant change, you know. And it's also really interesting that kids now feel like they can smoke marijuana before they go to school, something that from somebody as old as me was just unthinkable. It never occurred to us that we could get loaded before school. I think we were cheated in a lot of ways. No, I don't mean that, but I mean, I think, you know, for alcohol is harmless for 90% of the population. Probably marijuana is in the same ballpark with that. But there is 10% of the population or less for whom marijuana is really really lights their fire and can take over their life. I mean, even from my generation, the Cheech and Chong movies were almost like, you know, they were funny and all that, but there was an element of truth in that.
Yes.
That they were just sort of floating through life. Their ambition and energy was being sapped. Their whole life revolved around this stuff. And you'll see it today. And the people who are being affected that way will tell you that it's very natural, it's not addicting. And you know, then we get into the question of should you legalize marijuana or not, and that is a real hot button kind of topic. And there are legitimate arguments on both sides for that.
Yes, there are. So Tim, what about psychological dependence though? Have you seen patients who say they can quit anytime they want to, but psychologically they've really become dependent on the marijuana and they really can't stop?
Absolutely.
And of course it's affecting their memory and their concentration, but please go ahead, Tim.
And it's also affecting their ability to work. You know, if they have to pass a urine drug screen somewhere, they can't do that, so that limits their employment you know, options. And it really is impressive, and a lot of times they don't really realize that they absolutely cannot stop.
Yes.
You know.
And of course the long-term effects in terms of really affecting memory and concentration. It starts to have an effect on relationships too, huh, Tim, just like other addictive disorders.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And then, Tim, physiologically with marijuana, can you tell us a little bit about how physiologically how marijuana maybe affects or is stored in the body?
Well, it's stored in the basement membrane of some of the cells in your brain, and as you know, the half-life of marijuana, if you're a daily smoker, can be up to 25 or 30 days long. I mean, that's a huge piece of information there, that there's something, you're actually spilling a medicine in your urine 25 or 30 days later. And if it's and if you're a daily smoker and you've been smoking for years, you can imagine what that's doing to your brain.
Yeah.
But it's also very subtle, because a lot of times people on marijuana, I have trouble telling whether they're high or not at the time. You know, whereas if somebody's drunk, they usually smell bad and they're ataxic and are falling down.
Yeah. And then I know another drug that you're concerned about, Dr. Coughlin, is opiates.
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about your concern about that?
Well, the opiates are becoming a huge problem. In the age group between 38 and 54, they are the leading killer in the country.
That's amazing.
Yeah, as a result
so
of
like
overdoses.
Even more than automobile accidents?
Yes,
or,
even more than automobile accidents. And that comes out of the University of Michigan's Monitoring the Future study. And it's also been confirmed by some additional analysis by the Los Angeles Times. And I think that's just an incredibly shocking kind of statement. But you have to realize that this country is awash in narcotics anymore. There are something like 28 pain clinics on one street in Miami-Dade County in Florida, and people are driving from other states to get prescriptions for oxycodone. The drug companies are coming out with more and more powerful narcotics all the time, which is really just ridiculous. And you know the story behind oxycodone when it came out with Pfizer, and it was allegedly less addicting than anything else. And you have to wonder about some of the pharmaceutical companies. I've read an article saying that Pfizer, which was the original oxycodone company, has absorbed 2.3 billion, thousand millions worth of fines and penalties, and it keeps right on doing business. So you're seeing what a huge market and incredible money is involved in this.
Yeah, that is quite a bit. And, you know, we want to continue this discussion about opiates and maybe other legal type medications like benzodiazepines right after this brief break. Hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're going to continue our discussion about opiate abuse with Dr. Coughlin. So Tim, can you tell us a little bit more about opiates and how they affect the mind and the body and the life of someone and where do people get the opiates to? With all of your vast experience, try to be concise in these next couple of minutes, Tim, and tell us about opiate use.
Well, one of my patients recently, a 19-year-old, overdosed and died on heroin. And as you know, there were several men arrested in the last year for selling heroin for $5 a bag at Reno High. And I know at the time I was thinking, gee, you don't get life. These guys were given life in prison. And I thought, gee, you don't get life in prison for shooting people and that kind of thing.
Yes.
But this has kind of driven home the idea that when you're selling this stuff to kids that young, you're going to kill some of them and you're going to steal their life. And then we also have the prescription drug problem in this country is absolutely huge and is getting bigger all the time. And you would think that modern living was the most painful, dangerous thing that had ever happened, you know.
Yes.
The number of, I hear doctors complaining all the time that the number of narcotics they write is ridiculous, you know. And you don't go into medicine because you want to look at somebody who's writhing in pain and tell them that, and say no.
Yes.
But there are plenty of patients out there beating up on their doctor on a regular basis to preserve their habit. And then some of it is the pain, the way we're dealing with pain anymore. You know, we've come around to a point where we're saying you really don't need a diagnosis. The diagnosis is pain, and that may be things like neuropathic pain. There may be some truth to that.
Yes.
But there's also some truth to the idea that when you take enough narcotics, you change your perception of pain. You know, you have you begin to perceive even normal things as painful. And there's such a thing as narcotic-induced hyperalgesia, where the more pain medicines you take, the more pain you have, and that is a really scary place because it's hard to come off these drugs. It is very hard.
Well, we hear people, they're terrified, aren't they, Tim, of getting off of the opiates.
And there are some things that they can do. There's methadone programs. There's also a medicine called Suboxone, and I'll have to say that the success rate in people getting off methadone and Suboxone is not very good. I mean, that's a real scary kind of thing. When you think, gee, I'll experiment with this oxycodone or hydrocodone or something like that, you may be consigning yourself to a lifetime of having to see doctors or score drugs on the street, and it's a miserable existence.
And of course, I mean, people do say it must be okay because my doctor's writing the script, or I'm getting this out of Grandma and Grandpa's medicine cabinet, so it must be okay. And then there's an increased tolerance, and somebody's really hooked then, huh, Tim?
And there are people diverting it all over the place, too, you know.
Now, by diverting it, what do you mean?
By diverting it, they go into their doctor and they really pretty much scam the doctor. Then they take the narcotic prescription and they sell the pills on the street. And this is a huge thing that's going on all over the place.
And so people that are having problems with this, Tim, besides going into treatment, they can go to NA, they can go to Narcotics Anonymous, or they can go to Chronic Pain Anonymous and get some help, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell you, the success rate in these things is really poor. So people, we need to start recognizing that we're not doing as well in helping people who become addicted to narcotics as we might.
Yes. And Tim, what I hear you saying too is somebody has to really want it. They have to be willing to go through the withdrawal, and they have to be willing to learn new ways of dealing with their pain.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you tell people is you can knock your pain down from a 10 to maybe a 3. You know, with chronic pain patients, you say, your pain is real. There's no question about that. But the medicines have become a bigger problem than the pain they were designed to treat.
Dr. Coughlin, I can't thank you enough for coming in and sharing your wisdom with us again. You'll see up on the screen the information on the website to see Dr. Coughlin's show and streaming video. We want to thank Dr. Coughlin, and we want to ask you to join us next month as we continue to take a look at addiction recovery. Thank you for joining us.